You're watching Newsnight. The city of Cape Town is implementing plans to protect its firefighters. This follows a violent attack on 14 crew members in Kraaifontein over the weekend. A female firefighter suffered a hairline fracture to her arm after she was hit with a spade and wrestled to the ground by community members. The Gugulethu fire station was also set alight in July. Joining us now to discuss this further is Mayoral Committee Member for Safety and Security, J.P. Smith. Good evening, Mr. Smith. Thank you very much for your time. Of course, the couple of incidents that I've just spoken about now in my introduction add to numerous other incidents which have been happening over time. The question is, have you been able to now find a way of protecting the people who are providing these communities which very essential services?
That's always going to be extremely difficult because of the very nature of the work they do, in that they're face to face with communities. They're going to unpredictable locations and based on whatever the complaint there is of wherever there's a fire. And if you make it dependent on a police escort, you delay the process. So often fire in a red zone or an area where they've previously had problems will wait for a policing escort. Sadly, that policing escort will delay things, so we try not to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. But also the safety of our staff is important to us. They have families at home waiting for their safe return as well. And so what we've tried to do is equip the vehicles with extra cameras around it so we can monitor the situation, put protective film on the windows so that they're not easily smashed, and when necessary do police escorts, the addition of panic buttons on their handheld devices in the case of the policing staff and emergency staff. And of course we ask communities for information, and we will pay rewards so that we can try and prosecute the people who are responsible for these kind of attacks on staff, because those attacks are attacks on the broader community that harms everybody, because the whole community depends on the work that this staff does. I mean, Metro Police's statistics are even more frightening than that of the fire department.
Well, it does seem you are doing something about it from the actions that you've just alluded to. But what are you doing proactively to actually prevent the incidents from happening? How far, or have you engaged communities, for example, to get them to realize what this means, what the net effect is of what is happening, that they're going to be the ones who are deprived of these essential services?
Absolutely. So we are explaining this to communities. I did an interview on Radio Zibonele yesterday. We are explaining to communities where these attacks are prominent what the implications are. We've run articles in community newspapers, and remember that the fire department does around 800 to 900 sessions a year in communities, either theatre productions or awareness sessions where we talk face to face with the community, with our fire and life safety staff who talk to the community about how to avoid fires, how to respond when there is a fire. And we're also now moving towards starting to train community fire safety wardens, where community people who we will train so that they know what to do in a fire. And we're hoping that all of these interactions helps build a partnership and loyalty between some members of the community and fire, and that those members of the community will help ensure that other people are less likely to engage in violence against our staff. The problem, as I said, is equally problematic for the enforcement staff, our law enforcement and traffic officers who suffer frequent attacks. Metro Police recorded a 180% increase in attacks. We went from a few years ago figures of 21 attacks in a year to 59 attacks on our Metro Police. These are very worrying statistics. And unfortunately, you know, this is not a phenomenon limited to Cape Town. SAPs are seeing equal problems, and at least with our Special Investigations Unit, we've been able to make sure that by and large we get convictions against the people who are involved in very violent attacks on our staff.
And the last time we spoke about this, you did say that, trying to enlist the help of the South African Police Service would not necessarily be a solution. But how far have you gone? Where are your talks currently with the South African Police Service on this issue?
So I must say that we are at senior level in SAPS, especially with the Provincial Commissioner. We are getting very good cooperation. He takes the city's emergency and enforcement staff safety as seriously as he does that of his own staff. And when we call on escorts and otherwise, we get a good reaction. Unfortunately, that sometimes comes with some delay. And unfortunately, in the case of a fire, if you look at the one fire we had in Isikalo, informal settlement, that meant that a fire that had 8 or 9 structures burning when we got there, and we had to stand back because of the assault on the fire vehicle. Eventually, when we were able to get to the fire, there were already 28 structures alight because of the delay in getting a police escort. So we also feel that communities have a role to play, because often the city is getting dragged into conflicts between communities. That's one portion of a community or certain persons who set alight the structures of other persons as a form of attack on them, and that when the city comes to put out that fire, we become embroiled in the middle of that conflict, and that the violence is then taken out on the city staff, as was the case this last weekend in Wallisdean, where because of conflict between community members and an alleged drug house, when the city came to put out the fire, the staff involved in that were attacked. And the cowards involved in the attack actually targeted the female staff members more so even than the men.
What about the city's own Metro Police? I know you did just say just now that they too have come under attack, but at least they have weapons, unlike the firefighters or the emergency services personnel. What about them? Aren't they supposed to come to the party as well?
Yes, sir. They are our primary source of reaction. So essentially, when the fire department and sometimes the provincial ambulance service asks for escorts, it'll be predominantly law enforcement and Metro Police who are able to render those escorts. So before we even ask SAPS, we're asking the city's own enforcement staff, and we're heavily reliant on those support services. And I must tell you, these escorts are not just limited to emergency staff. They're requested continuously by the water department, the electricity department, even parastatals like Eskom and Telkom and others request assistance because their staff and their contractors who are repairing faults, electrical faults, telephone faults, etc., come under attack. And so they are all requesting the escort services of the city's law enforcement predominantly, who then have to go and protect such contractors while they work. And of course, this is doable, but it has a consequence in that it deprives communities of the policing efforts of those staff who are then acting in a protective function rather than going out and doing the community policing, which we prefer that they do.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much for your time, J.P. Smith, who is, of course, a Mayoral Committee Member for Safety and Security in the city of Cape Town.